forward.
Looks like there's a.
There we go. Okay, I think we're good. So I'm going to start with Dan, if that's all right. I can just pick on people and have you introduce yourself and tell us what your interest is and that kind of thing. We don't have nearly the 26 people who registered, which is fine. And that gives each of us more time to talk about what we're doing. So please don't feel pressed, don't feel limited for time.
Dan Armstrong from the Slocan Valley in the Kootenays, and I'm on the board of the Dumont Creek Burial Society, Ruth Porter and I, and others, but Ruth's here tonight. This is a cemetery that's been going since the mid-'80s or so, and we don't necessarily define ourselves as green, but we do natural in that we do all graves are hand dug by family insofar as we can manage it. The board and some of the people that are connected with the cemetery help out with grave digging when necessary. There's quite a movement in Nelson now to try and get the Nelson Cemetery to do green burials. I guess I prefer natural just because we do allow markers on the graves. We do cremations as well as burials. We encourage the families and friends to do most of the digging. And we have some trouble in the wintertime just because the road to the cemetery can be snowed in a little bit too much. And that's all I can think of right now, but any questions I'm happy to deal with.
I was so excited to finally learn about Dumont, and I've been wanting to splash it all over the website and social media, but I know that after having some conversations with you and Ruth by email, that you're wanting to keep it a little bit quiet, but what you have there is really what I would so love to see every community have. It's just a small community cemetery where families can bury their dead naturally. And I know that you don't want a whole bunch of folks from all over the Kootenays saying, yeah, natural burial, because you're a small group and a small graveyard. And so it makes sense to keep it fairly quiet. And I really appreciate you being here tonight because you're really doing what we all want to do, I think. So thank you. Thanks, Dan. Ross, I have you next on my screen.
Hey, Nicola. It's been kind of strange. I just got back from a 8-month travel away, and when I got back, there was a big death in our small community. It impacted a lot of people, and I knew George and Matt from before, and it's just really something I see is it. They've learned so much in all of their years and their experience, and they're both kind of speaking to the tune of somebody please take a chord. So I would love to just engage with them and learn what they've learned rather than having to learn it the hard way over again by myself. It's a really interesting thing. I think I'm fairly ignorant to the goings-ons at this point, but I'm just really lucky to have Matt give me the information for this meeting. So,
great.
Yeah, thanks for all being here.
Welcome here. Leslie. Hi.
Hi, and hi, Ross. I'm glad that you're on this call. So I live in Dodging Geeds on Haida Gwaii, which is an 8-hour ferry ride from the mainland. So forever, basically, people have been taking care of their loved ones dying. If you want to be cremated, you have to be transported on the ferry over to Terrace, which is the 8-hour ferry ride, and then another 1.5 hours to the crematorium in Terrace. So in essence, you know, to a certain level, we do have natural burials. Oh, and I guess I should say I am on the board of the Haida Gwaii Funeral Services Society. So we have a small volunteer board, and George Westwood and Matt, who have been referred to, they lobbied the provincial government long and hard to change or create new legislation to make a community undertaker position so that you didn't have to go through a designated funeral home. And they were actually, that legislation came into place, they were actually harassed by a funeral home. Like complaints were made to the, I think it's the Consumer Protection Branch or the Consumer Protection Bureau. So it took a legislation to allow us to have what's a volunteer community undertaker. And so Matt is able to do contracts with the coroner's service or support families in transport. He has a hearse and he can take bodies to the cemetery and assist in burials and services and with paperwork and that sort of thing. So you know, there's several cemeteries on the island and you don't have to be embalmed, you can be buried. There are markers, so I wouldn't say there's a formal natural cemetery or green cemetery, and I think it's something that we could continue to work towards. And I don't think the municipalities or the other communities would be opposed to that. I mean, if anyone's been here, the Masset Cemetery is beautiful. It's just in amongst trees and everything, and you're just buried in the forest, but you can still have a marker, right? So yeah, that's so my interest is to look at how do we make it even more green and more simple. And I like what you said, Nicola, about being able to, you know, take ownership of your deceased loved ones and have home funerals and that sort of thing. So yeah, I appreciate being here tonight.
Thanks, Leslie. So it does, and I remember as a child visiting those cemeteries, and
Yeah.
the memories of them are absolutely stunning. And I imagine they're even more so now. And so I actually do think that that is the essence of a natural burial ground. And I understand what you're saying too, of possibly establishing something that is specifically natural burial. And I wonder what you might think about for Haida Gwaii as a conservation burial ground, where because I know there's land there like there is everywhere in BC that desperately needs stewardship and preservation from logging and all sorts of environmental hazards. And so establishing a conservation burial ground might be a kind of something that Haida Gwaii that you folks could look at, just off the top of my head. Thanks.
Yeah,
Leslie.
I'm just kind of learning about that. So
Yeah. And there is in Colorado, I think it is, they have an open air cremation pyre. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Crestone is the name of the community.
right.
And
Yeah.
I don't know if they'd ever go for it on the island, but it's certainly a possibility. Shipping someone
Yeah.
off the island for a cremation is.
Matt has wanted that and has talked about that. And me not being familiar with it, I think, well, gosh, it's so rainy and windy here. You know, does that impact open? You know, I don't know how it's structured physically. So, you know, I mean, we certainly got wood here, but yeah, so I don't
Again,
know.
that's what I think too, all over BC is we have so much wasteful forestry practices, certainly around
Yeah.
our place here. There are
Yeah.
huge piles of slash that either
Yeah.
they may eventually burn. You know, anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's a whole nother story. I won't get into that.
But that's another way that people can take back ownership and not have the environmental implications of cremation. Yeah.
Sam, I have you up next.
Okay, I'm Sam Reddle. I live in Kamloops. We have a group of people here that met through a program sort of put on by our local Transition Kamloops group in partnership with a couple of other groups. It was generally dedicated to addressing climate change. And then from that, we had several small projects come out of that. And so one of these small projects that we have a group of people on here is setting up green burial options here in Kamloops. So myself and a couple others on the call are involved in that group. I'm sure we all have different personal motivations, but that's who we are. We are a committed group to getting somewhere with this. And just on a personal level, I'm from the Williams Lake area, specifically out toward Horsefly. And on my mom's side of the family, I think it was my granddad's brother, or he had several brothers. One of them passed away fairly young, and my great grandfather buried him on the farm. I don't know everything about the details, but from what I gather, it was not really very formal, probably not very legal, but also probably very green. I don't know if there'd have been a casket. There was a headstone, but not much more than that. And then everyone else in that family who passed away got buried there, and it became the Miocene Cemetery.
Oh, wonderful.
So I don't know how I don't know how the rules and regulations work there. My granddad managed it for a time. Unfortunately, he has since passed away and been buried there too. But yeah, I probably have family members I can talk to about that. They might know a little bit more than I do, but yeah.
Yeah, the Miocene Cemetery is still in use today.
Yep.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's one of our Caribou gems as far as old pioneer cemeteries. That's so cool. That's great. Family connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sam. So, yeah, and that's another thing I think that, there in Oregon, it's perfectly legal to bury someone on your property, not in your backyard in a city, obviously, but on your property. And also, I believe Nova Scotia, it's legal there. And it really ought to be legal again in British Columbia, like it was until, the last, 100 years, maybe less than that. Particularly out here in the hinterland where, so many people have ranches and large pieces of property, and it's perfectly reasonable to fence off a little area and say, yeah, this is our family graveyard. So I'd really like to see those laws change. Anywho, Geeta, you're up next, please, and thanks.
Hi, yes, I just come from Oregon. I went to this 50th anniversary land community, and it was so nice to have 3 full body burials there on their land over these years. And it was just so sweet. Yeah. So I'm in New Denver, and we've been meeting for 4 years, almost weekly, for just all the bureaucracy, and it's just been amazing. And the Denman Island Green Burial really supported us. That was so helpful, all the forms, and just to be prepared. And that's what they said. It just takes, it's a long road, and you just have to go step by step. And we had a little piece of land donated to us, and we're just going through the maybe last hurdle, and that's the last part of the licensing. So we'll be a standalone green burial ground, and it's very exciting to start thinking about the boulders where the plaques will go on, and how to get them there, and to do the paths. And so we may be able to open this fall if all goes well. So we're super excited. But
that's really exciting. Congratulations.
It's taken almost 4 years of just boring meetings about bureaucracy. And now the meetings are more fun to me anyway. No, that's me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gita. Yeah, that is very exciting. That's a group of people working steady on it, and that's really what it requires. Or one person in a lifetime. Heidi, I have you up next. Hi. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. So I'm with the SAM group, the Transition Kamloops Green Burial project. Yeah, I guess I would just add onto what Sam already elaborated on. I'm in particular working on a subcommittee that's looking at appealing the city bylaws. So in 2020, Kamloops came out with a master plan that has some really exciting options for green burial, and does acknowledge that currently the bylaws don't support green burial. I met with a funeral director this morning, actually, who was explaining that, yeah, you can buy a willow casket and you can get the green embalming fluid if you so choose, but to go on the ground, you need a plexiglass cover. Yeah, so I guess I'm just interested in what's worked for you guys. Gita, it's so great to hear that your committee's worked out. I hope that we're there maybe in the next 4 years or at some point. And yeah, probably just that in a lot of ways, being such a large urban center in the interior, Kamloops has a lot of different struggles. The Hillside Cemetery is relatively small, the Pleasant View the same. More than 22% of our population is age 65 and over. Yeah, also perhaps present company excluded, a generation that isn't particularly interested in talking about death care. A lot of the time, the funeral director that I talked to this morning said that she went to a trade show and had a woman like throw the pen back at her when she told her that she was a funeral home and run down the hallway. A lot of people don't feel like talking about death, which is unfortunate, but yeah, just interested in hearing what's worked for you guys and what your community needs are.
Wonderful. And
Tateli.
Heidi and Sam, you both strike me as young people compared to myself anyway. And I am so delighted to see younger people getting on board with this work, because that's what we need. Us gray hairs are doing lots of work, but you know, we're not going to live as long as you. And I'm just really thrilled to see younger people coming in. And it's the same in the death doula work. There are a lot of younger people coming on board and talking about death, talking about
And
dying.
Autumn, of course, being here.
Yes.
Thanks, Autumn.
Yeah. Sorry, just haven't
Yeah.
talked to you yet, right? So
thanks for paving the way.
So yeah, there's so much happening in Kamloops right now. I don't know if you have met Emily Bootle or if you know of her. She is an amazing woman, and she's actually moving to Kamloops. She's been a funeral director with Koru Cremation in Vancouver, and she's worked with NIO. She is a younger woman, and she is extremely bright and passionate, and yeah, she's a funeral director. She has a website called Death Care BC. Her name is Emily, and because you're involved in natural burial in Kamloops, you two will definitely run into her. Embrace her. She's awesome. She will do anything she can to help and move things forward. So that's just a little. She was going to be here tonight but couldn't make it. So.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Rod. Hi.
Hello.
You're up, sir.
So I lived most of my life in the Cariboo. My wife and I were both born in Kelowna, but moved up when we were quite young and had a farm in the Big Lake area, Big Lake Ranch. Not that far from your parents, I don't think, Sam. And during our time there, I've always been interested in cemeteries from a historical perspective, mostly what you can learn from walking through them, and just from sort of a legacy, almost a way of recording the lineage on the landscape. I've just found it, almost from an archaeological perspective, quite fascinating. And so in Big Lake, there was not a cemetery. The nearest one was Williams Lake. And there was a ranch land that was going to be subdivided that had a historic grave on it. And the developer was looking for permission from the community, or not permission, but endorsement. And so a committee of us got together and said, well, the community would endorse your development if we could preserve this piece of land with some historic buildings on it, and then this other piece of land with the historic grave on it, on a little hill overlooking the lake. And that all went through, but we did get a lot of pushback from the people that bought properties adjacent to the grave, and were opposed to a community cemetery. And then we ran into a lot of the red tape that Gita was probably talking about proximity to wells and a lot of other things that, so it got watered down basically to a memorial site for cremated remains. But I left the community shortly, well, in the midst of that, actually, but the society carried on, and there is a cemetery in Big Lake for cremated remains, basically around the historic grave. So that was a bit of a success, in that that's better than nothing. It's not what we were really looking for, but it gave me a picture of what the bureaucracy is in trying to get something established. So from Big Lake, we moved to Haggensburg, which is, most people would recognize Bella Coola as the closest town. We're just outside of Bella Coola. And there's really, there is a cemetery here. And I've applied to get onto the board. They only meet once a year. They really are very low key. I said, do you offer green burials? And they said, what's that? And so, and in fact, I had a little bit of trouble defining it, other than by what it's not. And, but apparently one can be buried here with, in a wooden box. The liner for the grave can be made of wood, in fact, is made of wood. It's just basically so that when they're backfilling, the rocks don't break open the casket, from what I'm gathered. It's quite stony ground. So, I mean, with hand digging, that can all be got around. But a wooden grave liner seemed to me fairly green anyway. I mean, it's organic, it does decompose. I was fine with it. There's no funeral director. The closest one is Williams Lake. So if you're going to take advantage of a full body burial in Haggensburg, unless you're doing a lot of transporting, it would have to be a family directed operation, which can be done. Nicola and I have talked, and she's assured me that is possible. And since then, I've spoken to someone who has done that. So, I mean, I guess you could say that it's a potential green cemetery, but it's still just a bunch of mowing weeds on gravel, if you ask me. And I'm hoping that we can develop a site that naturally regenerates to a forest, because that's one thing we do well down here, is grow trees. So that's one option. And then another one that I just thought I'd mention to the group is, we used to live in Likely before Big Lake even, and that's way east of Williams Lake in the mountains. right next to the historic ghost town of Quesnel Forks. And Quesnel Forks has a historic cemetery. And right away they said, oh yeah, green burial, fine, whatever, it doesn't matter. And it was basically not so much a green burial site as a basically do whatever you want site. I don't think they really had much in the way of regulations. Most people chose to inter cremated remains there, but is a site for whole body burials. The problem there for Barb and I, you have to have lived in Likely, which narrows down the clientele a bit. But we had. But the thing that deterred us more than anything is that it's closed 6 months of the year because the road is snowed in, like for a long way. So there's no access for pretty much all winter. So my wife and I are kind of pursuing doing what we can in Haggensburg and looking for some advice on how to kind of maybe convince the neighbors that this might be a good idea.
That sounds great. You're doing awesome out there.
Well, thanks. We're trying.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that all sounds really positive. I know it's a slow process, step by step, but the fact that you're getting onto the board and if you need, I don't know if you're familiar with the Green Burial Council out of the United States. They're sort of the overarching North American green burial group. Our Green Burial Canada is a wonderful website as well, but the Green Burial Council has incredible free resources for anyone who needs to convince or educate someone about what natural burial is. They have printouts, handouts, information. It's just an awesome resource. And so if you're going, Rod, to the board and you need to kind of lay it out a little more plainly, or there's really good resources there. And I love the idea of a wooden liner. That's
it
perfect.
seems practical.
It is practical, and like you say, for the rocky terrain you're in, it makes sense. You know, I'm just kind of blown away that it never occurred to me. It never occurred to me that it could be wood, you know, because it's either concrete or fiberglass. And my thing is just don't use it. But in some situations, like Haggensburg, then obviously it needs, you know, it would be a good idea. Wood just makes sense, and it is going to deteriorate. And I don't have a huge problem with this butter dishing over the grave or over the shrouded body, because the body's still in contact with the ground. I do have an issue with the whole liner box where it's under and over, but again, with wood, it wouldn't be so bad. But I think most cemeteries are using the butter dishing method, not so much the whole box, right? And so I can digress for a minute. I talked to the folks in Williams Lake, and for some reason we're kind of in the dark ages with our cemetery and funeral home there. So I explained to them exactly how, you know, someone could go in a wooden container onto the ground, and then you know, because I said that would kind of be closer to a green burial, and then they could have the butter dish liner over top. And it was just no, we're not doing green burials, we don't have room. And so you know, so I'm going to go back to them again and explain again, because there is great resistance with a lot of the old school folks in larger communities, I think, and who've been doing it forever. There's just an awful lot of resistance to the idea when some of the steps are so simple to make a burial a little bit greener, right? If we can put the body in contact with the ground, and if we can do away with the fiberglass and the concrete, we're that much closer, right?
So if I can just follow up a little bit, I did talk to the I guess the president of the society, and he said that if it's a homemade casket with a good solid lid, that we could forego the grave liner completely.
Good.
So, but then of course, yeah, that means finding someone to build such a thing and that kind of thing. So, but that seemed like an option here, and I think if you were to backfill it by hand, then that would also negate the need for this strong box. It was mostly just to protect the casket during backfilling.
Yeah, which is
So-
that's a little bit not really an issue, like you say, right?
Not really. No,
Done
no.
carefully, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's done by
And
family
one last
too.
thing.
Yeah.
I did take Krista Obenall's prep school course
Yeah.
this a month or so ago, and we talked a bit about green burial, and specifically, I think it's the one on Salt Spring Island, which seems to be fairly famous. And I was kind of surprised, no screws in the wooden casket,
That's right. That's
all
right.
of that kind of thing. And I thought, I got more screws in my ribs than I would have in a box. So I don't know what the problem with screws are, but if it still seems to me that there's degrees of organic, shall we say, when it comes to burial, and mainly if we're not embalmed and we're not in a plastic or steel box, that's if it's wood, that seems pretty green to me, screws or no.
Natural, like green is considered something else. But Nicola, what is the butter dishing? Sorry.
Oh, it's just what I call when it's a it's what almost every municipal cemetery says we absolutely you have to do if you're going to put a body in the ground. But it, I call it butter dish. You know what a butter dish? You've got your brick of butter and the butter dish goes over top.
Oh,
It goes over the top.
okay, got it.
It's called, it's obviously not common, but it is called butter dishing when you're putting a liner over a body like that. And
There's no bottom on it.
yeah, well, there doesn't have
Okay,
to be. That's my point. There doesn't have to be, because the argument is that it keeps the ground solid so that machinery can go over and people can mow and do all that sort of thing in a cemetery, right? So it keeps the ground solid. That's why it's done. That's the argument. So it doesn't need to have a bottom. It just needs to have the protection. Wood makes good sense.
But Nicola, are you saying that you're talking about the fiberglass vault cover?
Liner, yeah, vault cover. That's right. I can't find a municipal cemetery that doesn't demand that, and they charge extra. It's expensive. I was really surprised to see that, was it Cache Creek? Oh, one of our communities is still doing concrete. I mean, fiberglass, they're both bad, concrete and fiberglass, to put that into the ground, just to put a body in the ground, right? But I know in the US it's very common to be concrete. I thought in Canada it was more, and I think it is more fiberglass, which I say again is not a good option. Oh boy,
Ronnie, I have a question for you. You'd stated that there was a preparation course that you'd taken. Who was that you took it with?
That was Krista Obenall. She has a company called Death's Apprentice.ca, I believe is her address. And she and Cheryl McKay are doing quite a bit of work on the coast. She's a death doula. I'm sure Nicola would be able to connect you up with her if you wanted to talk. But it was a 5-week, 1 hour a week for 5 weeks, just covering the things you got to think about in end of life planning, basically. And that was one of them.
Before you die, as you're dying, once you're dead, all those things, right? Which is, of course, way, way more than a will. It's all the pre-planning and the planning so that you're not leaving your family with a giant mess to deal with. And Krista is awesome. She's wonderful. She's fun. She knows her stuff. And yeah, she's doing something at the Salt Spring Cemetery with Cheryl McKay coming up, a really neat event. Yeah.
Recommended.
Yeah. All right, we'll keep moving around the room here, and then we'll come back for lots more discussion here. Ruth, you're up. Hi.
Hi. I work with Dan on the Dumont Creek Cemetery or Burial Society board. Listening to everybody, I realize we are super fortunate. We've been going for the 40 years. Increasingly, most of our burials are shroud burials. Often we work with a funeral home out of Nelson sometimes, but increasingly we're moving back to families burying their dead. We have a transport coffin that people can borrow if they have the body at home, or even if a person died in the hospital or it was an accident and they're at the coroner's office. They can use the transport coffin and bring the body to the cemetery, lift the shrouded body out of the coffin. As Dan mentioned, we hand dig all our graves. We're super fortunate. It's an old glacial beach, so it's very sandy. So you can dig a 4-foot deep hole in 3 or 4 hours with
Wow.
people. Yeah, we're very fortunate. So, and somebody earlier on, I think it was you, Nicholas, said about how cremated to do cremation is cheaper than full body burial, where it's the opposite for us. It's much cheaper to just bury a body rather than taking it into Nelson or wherever to be cremated, because that's starting at $4,000. I've just heard. So, and the whole green and versus natural, and what Rod was talking about the screws. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we've never tried to be classed as a green burial, because if somebody has a favorite shawl or blanket that they want to be shrouded in when they die, and maybe it's polyester. I mean, we don't ever want to be in the position of saying, oh, it has to be green, or no, you can't put that under the body because it's plywood and it has, whatever glues are in it. So we just really are happy to be encouraging the families to do what feels right to them. We don't want them to use machines. It's all hand dug. So I just feel super fortunate because Dan and I have worked on most of the burials in maybe the last 8-10 years. I'm not even sure. And even people who are maybe a little bit grossed out by the whole process, invariably come up to us afterwards and just are so grateful that they could actually lower their brother, father, mother, child into the grave themselves. Sometimes we've had people with a shrouded body, a couple of people get down in the grave and the body is passed to them. So it just gives closure in a way that doesn't happen when your loved one, friend is buried in the traditional way, and they kind of send everybody off, and then somebody backfills and it's all done. This is the family the whole way, as much as possible. And I just think it's a wonderful way to say goodbye to anybody.
And I'm just about in tears listening to you because it's so perfect. What you're doing is so right.
Yeah.
And I so agree with you with not kowtowing to being certified, but instead to building on what people and families want to do, because that's what it's about. That's what's important. Not
Yeah.
certification. Certification means shit. It
Yeah.
really does. It
Yeah.
it costs money for one thing, but it also gives you so many levels of rules. And I just applaud you. And I'm thrilled that you're here tonight to share your experience, because would sure love to see more of this happen.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
thanks, Nicola.
Thank you. Anne, hi. You're muted, love. Thanks.
You hear me? I'm with Sam and Heidi's group in Kamloops. I'm new to Kamloops. I've come from a big city where funerals are done on an industrial rate. And all of my relatives were, in the beginning, they were buried in beautiful caskets. And then the generation after that, they started to do cremation, but it was all very organized and rigid and cold. I had never heard of green burial before I moved to Kamloops. And it seems to me that's exactly what people should have. They deserve to be cared for by their families, I think. So I want to get going on this.
Good. Yay. Lily's taken off for a moment, so Autumn.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so
Hello.
much for having me. I'm from Montreal. I was born and raised here. I do have family who live part-time in Vancouver, so I do have a connection to the area. But I've been interested in death and death care for over a decade, which is probably a little bit concerning to a lot of my friends and family, but I don't see an issue with it. I am a journalist, and I've kind of made a little bit of a reputation for myself for being the person who's interested in death and death care, not just on a local community level, but on a province-wide level here in Quebec, because we have a lot of rules and regulations that don't permit us to do most things. I was shocked to find out about a month and a half ago that you are legally obligated to embalm a body if it is not going to be viewed or cremated within about 24 to 48 hours. They do not give you the option. And that is deeply disturbing, not just because not everybody wants to be embalmed, but because not everybody needs to be embalmed. We also do not have the legal right to have home funerals at all. You need to be transported to some form of funeral home or other organization, hospital, something of that nature to be, you know, cleaned up, even though deceased bodies 99% of the time are not dangerous in any way. And obviously we still have the same issues where the pricing for funerals is just absolutely atrocious. And I'm sure if you look online in BC, you're not going to see any kind of pricing for any services, which means that the big conglomerates are going to be able to price you at a different rate one day than they are the next, and you know, potentially sell you on things that you not only don't need but aren't obligated to take, which I'm certain they often fudge the truth a little bit. It's incredibly interesting to speak to people across the country about what's going on and how we're all having exactly the same issues, where we just want to provide people with, you know, the right to choose what they want. And that goes further than just putting ourselves in a shroud or, you know, in a box through terramation. Some people might know it better as human composting, which I don't believe is offered anywhere in Canada at this point, which is a shame. We're fortunate enough, I think, both BC and Quebec to have alkaline hydrolysis, which is great, but no, there's no alkaline hydrolysis in BC yet. Oh my goodness.
Not yet.
We have one place in Quebec that does it, and I don't necessarily know how popular it is because I've spoken to a bunch of people about it, and they just look at me like I have two heads. They're deeply confused, which is always a very fun way for me to start off a conversation. But I think that providing people with the ability to make a choice for themselves, especially when it comes to things like the updates to medical assistance in dying, having people be able to write what it is that they want, you know, in the same way that we're able to plan for ourselves for the future, you're able to say what it is that you'd like to have done. But, you know, the governments are kind of standing in most people's way of being able to say, I would like to just be buried the way we were quite literally for a millennia, if not longer. And all of a sudden now we need a big company to tell us that you can't be put directly into the ground. You need to be embalmed and wrapped in a whole bunch of plastic or metal in order to be put in the ground to decompose. But just being able to create real green opportunities for people, because I think people actually do care what happens to them, and they don't want to just, you know, trust a company in order to be, you know, laid to rest for a final time.
Yes, and if we can get people to think and talk about it, we generally all do have ideas of what we want. I was really appreciate you bringing up the other green options being discussed. I purposely staying away from all that tonight because I really want us to focus on natural burial. And I also, I've been a real advocate for choice, and I do believe that choice is important. But I also believe we need to understand that all these other options use resources. They use facilities and containers and power and everything that seems so unnecessary when we wrap somebody in a shroud and put them in the ground. And that's where we're staying tonight.
I hope with the recognition too that land use in most places is a big concern, and that is also a resource.
It is in the cities. I believe that recompose is a wonderful option. But in the rural areas, I don't believe that setting up a conservation cemetery is a problem. You know, all it is is going to help. That's my feeling about it. Do you have an argument to that?
Oh, I'm not here to argue. I'm here,
No,
I'm
I mean,
here to listen for sure. I think in most places, yeah, we're coming to understand that there's more to the human nature, not dichotomy, but interaction and relationality that needs to be considered. And yeah.
Thank you. Lily, I think you're up. Lily, you're up.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm in Nelson, and I'm part of the Nelson End of Life Society. And if you're interested in the work that we're doing, I'm a death doula, and we have a website that gives a lot of information and resources on how you can help people in the pre-dying things. We've got our Good to Go package, it's called, and then our Gone for Good package for after the person has died, just to help walk people through all those things. We provide Techna Ice if someone wants to have the body for a little while at home. And yeah, so we in 2018, I made a presentation to council to try and get green burials going. And council changed and it never got anywhere. However, I made another presentation just in mid-June, this past June, and it seems like we've got a green council, and they're taking it seriously and they want to go somewhere. So that was the committee of the whole, and it was quite positive and hopeful, and they want to incorporate a green burial into their master burial plan for next, well, 2024. But we said, could we possibly take off the requirement for the vault cover, because everybody's going in with a vault cover now. So just, can we go in the ground now in a shroud or a box? And so we're looking at bylaws, and I think it was you, Heidi, who talked about bylaws, that's what you're doing. For the presentation to council, I was working with Eric Lees, who was on Green Burial Canada. I think he was the chairman of it for a period of time. Anyway, he was very helpful and gave me the bylaws for the Green Burial Cemetery, a section of Penticton's Green Burial Cemetery. And I've got all those bylaws, and if I'd be happy to send them to anybody. It's like 45 subcategories for everything, because we basically want to remove the requirement for a grave, a vault cover, until we can get, we're not, they're not going to placate us just by giving us this little thing for the next year until we can get a master plan and get green burials going, or natural burials. Yeah, I'm really glad this has been kind of clarified for me, at least during this discussion tonight. And the opportunity to give people choices, which may require some things that aren't entirely green. And I mean, we just want to make it so that we can grow trees and shrubs and ground covers over people when they're in the ground. But yes, if you are interested in me forwarding any of these bylaws to you, I'd be very, very happy to. So that's kind of, excuse me, where we are now, is we're going to try and bury people. We're trying to look into this bylaw about requiring a vault cover, because from our understanding, it's to prevent slumping in of the grave. And the cemetery staff are saying that they have to, fill in the odd one anyway. So we're just going like, well, really, how much fiberglass do we need in this land forever? So we're really, that's our push now in this next week, is to try and get rid of those. And with a lot of our council are green, they want this. So it's looking hopeful, and it's been a very long journey.
And maybe take a page from Rod there too, with the wooden, if they absolutely demand a grave liner, and suggest possibly wood, if anything that'll move us a bit closer, right? And you're doing, congratulations. It's a long, hard road you folks have been on. Holy smokes.
It's surprising. It just seems like an obvious thing, we think we're like a pretty hip green community, but gee whiz.
Yeah. So everybody check the chat before we leave tonight, in case we've got some people messaging with email addresses and that kind of thing. I also have everyone's email address here, which if you don't mind, I could share with each of us in case you wanted to follow up with somebody. I'll send a follow-up email with the recording so that you can access that if you want, and also with the group's email addresses here, unless anyone objects. Do that. Heidi, I feel like I jumped down your throat. I'm so so I'm apologizing. Really, it's I'm so fed up with forestry and the practices that are happening up here, and the fact that David and I have spent 25 years here stewarding this little piece of land like it's the last piece of land on earth. And I know that natural burials are a gentle and good thing to do with the land, because it's a constant.
Absolutely. And it's such a, it's like, I think it might've been Rodney earlier saying that, like, it's such a great way to protect land and be sure that, development can't come in. And no, it's absolutely a great option for so many of the rural communities in the interior. I grew up in Hope, so kind of like on the edge of the Fraser Valley.
Absolutely.
And so I totally see the merit in both. Yeah. I didn't feel like you jumped down my throat at all.
Good. Good. So
question, Leslie and Ross, what does it mean, the undertaker? What does that position do? I can't remember what you called it, Ross. You said a community undertaker, something like that. What does that person do?
To be completely honest, I don't know. This is just like the very first week I kind of put my name into the hat, as I heard that the guys were kind of looking to step away, but nobody was stepping forward. So just in the short few talks that I've had with Matt, he basically said, like, my hearse stays with the society. There is a business that needed to be set up, which he has set up, because there is transportation and insurances that need to be able to be covered still here, because say you crash with somebody's remains in the back of your vehicle, you're kind of liable for that, and people's feelings and whatnot. So he's kind of covered his butt and followed some legislation in that regard. And I think that they dig the holes, they help people just like a funeral director would, but in Haida Gwaii, it's got a different mentality than I've seen anywhere else. And people are willing to do things for not the cost of money. It's like, what are you willing to do this for? People say, or what's the least you'll take? It's like, what can I do for you? That's kind of how it goes around here. So having that in mind, that's I think that's what they do. I'll be just liaison to people's processes and kind of learning as I go.
So
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead, Leslie.
I would just add that it is a liaison position, really, to support families in kind of the post-death and even pre-death. In a way, the volunteer community undertaker is kind of a death doula. He does support families in the process, and when death occurs, generally what happens here is the body goes to the morgue, but we have a really nice morgue in Dodge and Geeds where there is it's in a cedar longhouse shaped building. And so in the back is the coolers and the trays and everything, but in the front is a beautiful cedar paneled room, with sitting. And so it's a position that supports families. They help them with what paperwork needs to be done. It's kind of like a funeral director, but volunteer. And so they'll liaise with the municipality for the cemetery and the plot and make sure the hole is dug. And I don't know if it makes me want to go and read our bylaw, because I don't know what our bylaw says about vault covers, but that isn't done here. People are generally buried in a cedar box. Matt builds caskets, and it's kind of an enterprise here. There's 2 or 3 people that on the island that build beautiful caskets or bentwood boxes for cremated remains, and the body is buried in a hole that's dug. And I think the main requirement that I've seen in our local cemetery is that the hole has to be 6 feet. So, we dig this big 6-foot deep hole, but then the casket is lowered by whoever the family chooses to lower the casket, and you can put in whatever you want, on top of it, whether it's a whiskey bottle or, flowers or whatever. And then the hole is filled in by people, and the community undertaker, sometimes he even leads the ceremony for people if they don't have the wherewithal, or they're not religious, or they just want someone to sort of orchestrate who does what when and who's going to say what. So that's what that person does. There you go, Ross. That's your job description right there. I think you and I should meet and go for lunch and talk about it. Yeah, it'd be great.
The legislation that George worked so hard to get in place to change, I have it on our greenburialbc.ca website in a blog post that's not too far back, if anyone wanted to actually see what that legislation is. How it's written up, right? And so it's really interesting because Haida Gwaii is a entity unto itself, being an island. But in BC, it is legal for us to do anything, to do the entire process around a death. It is completely legal. And so it's and so it was really interesting to hear you describe that, Leslie, because it's different in that you're acting as a funeral director, basically, without the funeral directive training, dollars trapping nonsense, right?
And
And-
that was the problem, you know, some other funeral director had, I guess.
Yes, that's right. And then,
Yeah.
and it's legal for us to do it all anyway. Like Rod, you can,
Yeah.
in Ogdensburg, you don't need to involve a funeral home at all
Yeah,
for any part of your death, right? And burial. And that's true of everywhere in BC. There's forms to fill out and things that we have to attend to, obviously, but it's all doable. And it's
Yeah.
not super
Yeah.
complicated. It
and
just takes
you know,
time.
certainly not everybody by any means uses this community
Right.
undertaker,
Right.
right? It's like for the Haida community, you know, they've been burying their people for millennia, and it's not a stretch that, you know, they'll build their cedar
Yeah.
box and there'll be a funeral, and Matt's not involved at all. And even in the non-Haida communities, it's just a volunteer service if
Yes.
people need it. But
And
if you don't need it,
Wonderful. Yeah.
you don't have to use it, right? It's
And
not.
it's great that it's there, just like you say, like a doula service, right?
Yeah.
For those
and-
people who want the guidance and need the support and the
Yeah,
paperwork, it's always
you
a
know,
trial,
if
to
you
have
don't
someone.
have the family support or the friends, or you know, you're just a small family unit or something, maybe you need that, or you're, you know, it's just a service that's there.
Yeah.
And
Maybe you don't have any family, then that service is awesome, right? It's like,
yes, well, I mean,
yeah.
that's definitely where Matt has stepped in, where there has been people with no family, and the community has supported that, and you know, the village has supported the burial in the cemetery. And so, you know, it's always been a very much, let's do what we need to do to take care of one another.
It's really exciting to hear from everyone, to find out a bit of what's going on in other parts of the province. I'd really like to do this again, say maybe 2 months down the road. I'll put the word out again, and perhaps we could meet again. We're getting close to our end time here, so I want to open it up to if anyone has questions of each other or the whole group, or something you'd like to talk about. I'll just kind of throw it open.
I'd like to ask Heidi how you're going about trying to shift the bylaws. Are you working with a council member, or how is that happening?
Thanks. So we're still in our pretty early stages with the bylaw shift. We have a 3-person subcommittee of the group. Some of the other group are looking at natural burial plots, or potentially setting up a cemetery. Our group is, more looking at how can we enact this in Kamloops sooner rather than later. We've been connected with our, what is his title? Parks and Civic Facilities Manager, which is unfortunately, he's a little bit too important to get on the ground stuff happening. So we received the master plan from him, and we have a couple of leads from the funeral director that we one of the group members and I talked to this morning, who we're going to follow up with. But the general idea, is to hopefully get some champions on the city council who, if they've written in the city bylaw, or sorry, the master plan, that there's the recognition for this, that there's the need for this, that the shift should hopefully come along. But it would look like, putting together a petition for the city council, and that process that I'm sure Gita is familiar with, and
Will you be making or planning to make a presentation to council? Oh, and in person?
Yep, that'll be good.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Lily, I have a question for you. You had said about, how to get away from having to use the shrouds or the covers for the burial sites. Um, I would be willing to make some prototypes. I will be kind of stepping into some making as well, and we could do some tests. And then that way, it's kind of like if you want to know how to build a thing, I could actually probably make a jig, or I can make the diagram so that people can make their own. And then that way they can kind of get away from it, keep it really like close to home, like, hey, let's get together, let's do something as a family. That's kind of the mentality that I have. I have a really amazing family, and I feel really fortunate to have that. And so that's kind of how I'm trying to tie in the family unit to funerals or, death celebrations, or not celebrations, that's the wrong word, but you know what I mean? Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you needed any help, I guess, designing something to get past that problem, and I guess for anybody else, that'd be something I'd be willing to work on.
Oh, well, that sounds interesting. And yeah, I'm curious about what you're doing. And I noticed that you asked for information, and I'm wondering which information it is that you'd like.
I'm really just trying to be a sponge, and you offered some information earlier. And
This was on the Penticton bylaw, which is
That's right.
excellent. Yeah,
yeah.
very worth looking at.
Okay, so I can send you both that Penticton bylaw, and I'd also just like to let you know about the Nelson End of Life Society website, because there's so much information there in our resources that might be useful for you. I hope it would be. Just our Good to Go package and our Gone for Good package. It really helps people. I mean, everybody's, it's a fragile time when someone has just died, and so it kind of walks you through the process, whether it's an unexpected death at home, or whether it's an emergency out of the blue kind of thing. It gives you the steps, things that you need to do right away, and it really empowers families too. I think that's what we're trying to do, is give people choices. If they want to transport the body, that's a viable thing for them to do. If they wanted to, whatever part of it that they want to do, we want them to know that they can do it, or not, whatever the choice is. But yes, you can call the funeral home, or if you prefer to do it yourself, and just really put it on the table to give them options and alternatives. So death can come home if people want it to.
I really like how you stated that the family can kind of just come together, and you have these packages, so it makes them easy. There's no pressure sales, basically, is what it comes down to for me. Death isn't something that you should have to buy.
That's right. And yet some people don't want to have anything to do with it. So we're trying to, we just want to respect where anybody's coming from. But also it's an education process, because they don't even know that they can do these things, right?
And that we're not limited, like if I died here right now and couldn't have a natural burial, my husband could transport me to some other part of the province where natural burial is available. So, we have that option too, of moving throughout the province and taking care of our own dead, of moving our own dead. And Lily, I know your website is amazing, and it's a tremendous resource. So I too encourage people to get in there and have a look around and share the information, because it's so valuable.
I'd like to mention that, speaking of websites, that Dumont Creek has one as well, Dumont Creek Cemetery.ca. And it sounds like we've been through a lot of these steps that we've been talking about tonight. And give you an idea, I might get in trouble with Ruth for this, because we're still working on the website, but it's out there, and goes through a lot of our experiences and who we are. So,
and I'd like to just clone you throughout the province. Little Dumont clones everywhere.
Yeah, you were so lucky that in the 80s there was no restrictions. We were just so jealous when we heard of your story. What we have to go through now, but
That's right.
really good.
Onward, onward and upward. Change is happening. Slowly or not, it's coming. Thank you all very, very much. It's 5 to 8, so we can, I think, unless anybody else has anything else, we can probably say goodnight. And just a quick hands up if anyone would be interested in meeting again.
Oh,
So,
sure.
yeah. Okay. Great.
Thank you, Nicola.
Great.
I just
So,
wanted to thank everyone for calling in. I think I firmly believe that if we can have a critical mass, or if we can build up to a critical mass, it'll become monumentally easier for others to follow. I mean, I think that one of the best ways we can get counselors on board in our community or in any other community or in communities aren't even represented here is to say, oh, look, Penticton has this, Dumont Creek Cemetery has this, Nelson has this, hopefully soon Chilcotin or Williams Lake will have this, Kamloops will have this, and oh, I guess we'll be stuck in the stuck in the past if we don't get moving on this.
Yeah.
So that's my hope.
thanks, Sam. Yes.
Just one thing I wanted to say, we've had a really good experience working with the Nelson Funeral Home Thompsons. And I think that it's too easy to write all those people off. I mean, you mentioned a woman who was moving to Kamloops shortly, who was a funeral director, Krista Ovanel. I think that, you know, they're in this industry where they got to make money and it's, you know, but, you know, I think there's more and more people moving into it. So I don't think we should just write them off. We've had some, the place in Nelson has allowed families to come in, shroud the body, use a transport coffin. They are open to hybrid burials, basically.
Yeah, they are. They even came to our work party for
Yes,
the
I
New Denver for
Yes, thanks, Ruth. There are definitely some corporate, you know, corporate people who are not that easy to deal with. But in British Columbia, we have a huge groundswell of funeral providers who are making a tremendous difference. And Emily Boodle is one of them, Krista Ovanel, Nio in Vancouver. There are lots, and most of them are women that I know of, and they're younger and they're making a difference and they're making change. They're talking about death differently. They're doing it differently. They're offering, unlike a lot of the corporations, they offer their prices, they offer their love and care, you know? And so, yes, I agree with you. No, we can't write everyone off with the same brush. There's some really wonderful people making a great difference. Thank goodness.
And Lorraine from the Royal Oak Cemetery in Victoria, she said that the funeral homes that got on board right away with getting natural burials and providing wicker or shrouds and selling all these things, they're the ones that actually they took off, and the Thompson's Funeral Home came to the presentation to council, so they're totally on board with us. They're smart if they get on board, right?
That's right. That's right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well,
Thank
you, everybody. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for pulling us all together. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon and I'll get an email out with some info and the recording, and we shall meet again. Thank you so much. This has just been exciting and lovely.
Mhm.
And good luck for Quebec, Autumn.
Bye for now.
Thank you all.
Thank
Good
you
night.
so much. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye, all.
Right.
Thank you.
Night all. Night, Dan.